Hare Krishna devotees, welcome to day 81 of our Bhakti Vaibhava seminar on Srimad Bhagavatam, 4th Canto. And we are in the 29th chapter of the 4th Canto, which is titled Talks Between Narada and King Prachinabarhi. So we already began, and we are in, let me just see where we are in. We're in the second section from verse 2 to verse 25, which we've titled Narada starts explaining the story of Puranjan, because Prachinabarhi, unfortunately, he didn't understand it. Okay, so here we go, devotees. First of all, let us recite our prayers. Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Shrimati Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharane Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pastyatya Jatarane Sri Krishna Chaitanya Pramanityananda Shri Advaita Gadadha Shivasadi Gaura Bhaktavrinda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Vanchakapatarubhyascha Kripas Sindhubhya Eva Cha, Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Verse 15. When it is said that Puranjan goes to Vaishasa, it is meant that he goes to hell. He is accompanied by Lubdhaka, which is the working sense in the rectum. Formerly, I've also spoken of two blind associates. These associates should be understood to be the hands and legs. Being helped by the hands and legs, the living entity performs all kinds of work and moves hither and thither. Right, that was verse 15. There's no purport. On to verse 16. The word Antapura refers to the heart. The word Vishuchina, meaning going everywhere, indicates the mind. Within the mind, the living entity enjoys the effects of the modes of material nature. These effects sometimes cause illusion, sometimes satisfaction, and sometimes jubilation. So there's a short purport here. Basically, Prabhupada explains that, first of all, Prabhupada explains that this is all about the effects of the modes of material nature. The mind and the intelligence of the living entity, they're affected by the modes. And according to the association of the modes, the mind goes here and there. The heart feels satisfaction, jubilation or illusion, according to the effects of the modes. But actually every living entity in the material condition remains inactive. It is the modes which act on the mind and the heart. And therefore it's clearly stated in Bhagavad Gita chapter 3 verse 27, famous verse, Prakrite kriyamanani gunai karmani sarvasha ahankara vimudatma karta aham iti manyate. The bewildered spirit soul, under the influence of the three modes of material nature, thinks himself the doer of activities that are in actuality carried out by nature. Verse 17. So before it was explained that the queen is one's intelligence, while one's awake or asleep, that intelligence creates different situations. Being influenced by contaminated intelligence The living entity envisions something and simply imitates the actions and reactions of his intelligence. Okay, so Puranjan's queen is described here as the intelligence. We're aware of that. Puranjani. The intelligence acts both in the dream state and in the waking state, but it's contaminated by the modes. And since the intelligence is contaminated, the living entity is also contaminated. So in the conditioned state, the living entity acts according to his contaminated intelligence. Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, although he simply remains an observer, he nonetheless acts, being forced by a contaminated intelligence, which in reality is a passive agent. Okay, so verses 18 to 20. Narada Muni continued, what I referred to as the chariot was in actuality the body. The senses are the horses that pull the chariot. As time passes year after year, these horses run without abstraction, but in fact they make no progress. Pious and impious activities are the two wheels of the chariot. The three modes of material nature are the chariot's flags. The 5 types of life here constitute the living entity's bondage, and the mind is considered to be the rope. Intelligence is the chariot driver. The heart is the sitting place in the chariot, and the dualities of life, such as pleasure and pain, are the knotting place. The 7 elements are the coverings of the chariot, and the working senses are the 5 external processes. The 11 senses are the soldiers. Being engrossed in sense enjoyment, the living entity seated on the chariot hankers after fulfillment of his false desires and runs after sense enjoyment, life after life. Okay, so we have a purport by Srila Prabhupada. Prabhupada says, the entanglement of the living entity in sense enjoyment is very nicely explained in these verses. The word samvatsara, or the progress of time, is significant. Day after day, week after week, etc., the living entity becomes entangled in the chariot's progress. The chariot runs on 2 wheels, pious and impious activities. According to his pious and impious acts, the living entity attains certain positions in life. This does not indicate making progress. Yes. And Prabhupada refers to a verse from Chaitanya Charitamrita, Madhya Lila chapter 19, verse 138. The living entity is wandering throughout the entire universe and taking birth in different species on different planets. Thus he moves up and down, but that is not real progress. Real progress is getting out of this material world altogether. So then, Srila Prabhupada quotes Bhagavad Gita chapter 8, verse 16. From the highest planet in this material world down to the lowest, all are places of misery, wherein repeated birth and death take place. But one who attains to my abode, O son of Kunti, never takes birth again. So anyway, we all know how it works. Even if you're promoted to Brahmaloka, you have to come down again to the lower planets. And so, therefore, the living entities in the material world are just wandering perpetually under the influence of the modes. And Prabhupada makes an interesting point that it's like an airplane circling the earth day and night, but not capable of leaving the earth's gravitational field, so it's just not making any progress. So just as a king is situated on a chariot, the living entity is seated in the body. The sitting place is the heart, and the living entity sits there and struggles for existence. Narottam Das Thakur says, as we've just read a couple of days ago, Karmakanda Jnanakanda Kevala Vishirabandha Amrita Balaya Yebakai Nanayoni Sadapire Kadarya Bhakshanakare Tara Janma Adapate Yaya, which indicates the living entity struggles very hard due to the influence of fruitive activity and mental speculation, and simply gets a different type of body, life after life. He eats all kinds of nonsense and is condemned by his activities of sense enjoyment. If one really wants to progress in life, he must give up the ways of karma kanda and jnana kanda, the fruit of activities and mental speculation. So, Srila Prabhupada continues, if one is fixed in Krishna consciousness, one can become free from the entanglement of birth and death and the general vain struggle for existence. The words in these verses, the words Mriga Trishnam Pradhavati, are very significant, Prabhupada says, because the living entity is influenced by a thirst for sense enjoyment. And he's like a deer going to the desert for water, simply searching in vain. And he gives up his life uselessly. Yes, sacrifices his life. There's no water in the desert, so he gives up his life just in vain. So Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, everyone is planning for future happiness, thinking that somehow or other, if he can reach a certain point, he'll be happy. In actuality, however, when he comes to that point, he sees that there's no happiness. He then plans to go further and further to another point, and this is called Mriga Trishna, and its basis is sense enjoyment in this material world. What was previously explained as Chanda Vega, powerful time, is covered by days and nights, named Gandharvas and Gandharvis. The body's lifespan is gradually reduced by the passage of days and nights, which number 360. Okay, so, there's very short purport here, I'll just read it. The word parikrantya means by traveling. The living entity travels on his chariot day and night during a year, consisting of 360 or more days and nights. Life's progress is taken for the unnecessary labor required to cover these 360 days and nights of life. Okay, so on we go, devotees, to verse 22. What was described as Kala Kanya should be understood as old age. No one wants to accept old age, but Yavaneshvara, the Yavana Raj, who is death, accepts Jara, old age, as his sister. In the body, the living entity accepts Kala Kanya old age, just before death. I mean, yeah, look at me. What am I meant to do? You can't reject it. Yeah. Anyway, Yavaneshwar is the emblem of death, Yamaraj. But before going to the place of Yamaraj, the living entity accepts Jara, old age, the sister of Yamaraj. And then one is subjected to their influence due to impious activities. So those who are Krishna conscious, who are engaged in devotional service under Narada's instructions, are not subjected to the influence of Yamaraj and Jara. So Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, if one is Krishna conscious, he conquers death. After leaving the material body, he does not accept another body that is material, but returns home back to Godhead. This is verified by Bhagavad Gita chapter 4, verse 9. Janma karma shame divyam evam yoveti tatvada chaktvadam punar janma naiti mameti sarjana. If one just understands the transcendental nature of Krishna's appearance and activities, then he doesn't take birth again, but goes to Krishna's eternal abode. So on we go, devotees, verses 23 to 25. The followers of Yavaneshwar, Yamaraj, are called the soldiers of death, and they are known as the various types of disturbances that pertain to the body and mind. Prajvara represents the two types of fever, extreme heat and extreme cold. Extreme heat is typhoid, extreme cold is pneumonia. The living entity lying down within the body is disturbed by many tribulations pertaining to providence, to other living entities, and to his own body and mind. Despite all kinds of tribulations, the living entity, subjected to the necessities of the body, mind, and senses, and suffering from various types of disease, is carried away by many plans due to his lust to enjoy the world. Although transcendental to his material existence, the living entity, out of ignorance, accepts all these miseries under the pretext of false egoism, I and mine. In this way he lives for 100 years within this body. So let's have a look at the purport. So, the entangled living entity is actually separate from material existence, because the living entity, the soul, is superior energy, and the material energy is inferior. And the material energy is also binna. It is separated. So when the internal or superior energy contacts the external energy, it is subjected to many tribulations, brought about by air, water, fire, extreme heat, extreme cold, sunshine, excessive eating, unhealthy food, maladjustments of the three elements of the body, kapha, pitta, vayu, and so on. So the intestines, the throat, the brain, etc., these things are all affected by all types of diseases. So powerful, they become the sources of extreme misery for the living entity. But actually the living entity is different from all these elements. Extreme fever, typhoid, pneumonia, prajvara, creates extreme misery. Other living entities cause miseries too. State taxes, thieves steal, cheaters cheat. Then famine, pestilence, scarcity, war, etc., caused by demigods or other sources beyond our control. It's difficult. So many enemies are there, and this is to help us to understand how miserable material existence is, with a view to inspiring us to get out of material existence. So in the next paragraph, Prabhupada makes the point that knowing all of this, we should be keen to get out of the material world and go back home, back to Godhead. Because we're not happy in these bodies. We suffer thirst, hunger. We're influenced by the mind, by words, anger, the belly, the genitals, by the rectum, and so on. So many miseries encircle the transcendental living entity, simply because he desires to satisfy his senses in this material world. So rather, if we just withdraw from sense gratification and allow our senses to participate in devotional service, all these problems will immediately diminish. Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, and with the advancement of Krishna consciousness, he will be freed from all tribulation, and after giving up the body, will return home, back to Godhead. Right, so that's very good. That's Narada beginning his instructions, beginning his explanations of what Prajnaparishat should be learning from this whole story of Paranjan. So now, though, devotees, in the third section, from verse 26 to verse 37, Narada explains the philosophy behind the story. First of all, let's read the verses, 26 and 27. The living entity by nature has minute independence to choose his own good or bad fortune. But when he forgets his Supreme Master, the personality of Godhead, he gives himself up unto the modes of material nature. Being influenced by the modes of material nature, he identifies himself with the body and, for the interest of the body, becomes attached to various activities. Sometimes he's under the influence of the mode of ignorance, sometimes the mode of passion, and sometimes the mode of goodness. The living entity thus gets different types of bodies under the modes of material nature. 28. Those who are situated in the mode of goodness act piously according to Vedic injunctions. Thus they are elevated to the higher planetary systems where the demigods live. Those who are influenced by the mode of passion engage in various types of productive activities in the planetary systems where human beings live. Similarly, those influenced by the mode of darkness are subjected to various types of misery and live in the animal kingdom. 29. Covered by the mode of ignorance and material nature, the living entity is sometimes a male, sometimes a female, sometimes a eunuch, sometimes a human being, sometimes a demigod, sometimes a bird, an animal, and so on. In this way, he's wandering within the material world. His acceptance of different types of bodies is brought about by his activities under the influence of the modes of nature. 30 and 31. The living entity is exactly like a dog who, overcome with hunger, goes from door to door for some food. According to his destiny, he sometimes receives punishment and is driven out, and at other times receives a little food to eat. Similarly, the living entity, being influenced by so many desires, wanders in different species of life according to destiny. Sometimes he's high, sometimes he's low. Sometimes he goes to the heavenly planets, sometimes to hell, sometimes to the middle planets, and so on. 32. The living entities are trying to counteract different miserable conditions pertaining to providence, other living entities, or the body and mind. Still, they must remain conditioned by the laws of nature, despite all attempts to counter these laws. 33. A man may carry a burden on his head, and when he feels it to be too heavy, he sometimes gives relief to his head by putting the burden on his shoulder. In this way, he tries to relieve himself of the burden. However, whatever process he devises to counteract the burden does nothing more than put the same burden from one place to another. 34. Narada continued, O you who are free from all sinful activity, no one can counteract the effects of fruitive activity simply by manufacturing a different activity devoid of Krishna consciousness. All such activity is due to our ignorance. When we have a troublesome dream, we cannot relieve it with a troublesome hallucination. One can counteract a dream only by awaking. Similarly, our material existence is due to our ignorance and illusion. Unless we awaken to Krishna consciousness, we cannot be relieved of such dreams. For the ultimate solution to all problems, we must awaken to Krishna consciousness. 35. Sometimes we suffer because we see a tiger in a dream or a snake in a vision, but actually there's neither a tiger nor a snake. Thus we create some situation in a subtle form and suffer the consequences. These sufferings cannot be mitigated unless we are awakened from our dream. Verses 36 to 37. The real interest of the living entity is to get out of the nescience that causes him to endure repeated birth and death. The only remedy is to surrender unto the Supreme Personality of Godhead through his representative. Unless one renders devotional service unto the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Vasudeva, one cannot possibly become completely detached from this material world, nor can he possibly manifest real knowledge. Okay, so let us carry on and do the verses again, but with the purports. Verses 26 and 27. The living entity by nature has minute independence to choose his own good or bad fortune. But when he forgets his Supreme Master, the personality of Godhead, he gives himself up unto the modes of material nature. Being influenced by the modes of material nature, he identifies himself with the body, and for the interest of the body, he becomes attached to various activities. Sometimes he's under the influence of the mode of ignorance, sometimes the mode of passion, and sometimes the mode of goodness. The living entity thus gets different types of bodies under the modes of material nature. Right, so let's have a look at the purport here, first paragraph. All different types of bodies. Prabhupada explains, well, Prabhupada actually utilizes Bhagavad Gita chapter 13 verse 22, which it's an important verse. So Prabhupada says these different types of bodies are explained in Bhagavad Gita 13:22. Let me just read the translation. the living entity in material nature follows the ways of life, enjoying the three modes of nature, this is due to his association with that material nature. Thus he meets with good and evil among various species. Prabhupada goes on broadening the purport that the living entity here is competing, trying to imitate, trying to compete with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And Prabhupada gives an example, it's an interesting example, that the living entity, that a businessman who's employing a servant, the businessman has his business and he's going on selling or doing whatever his business is. So, but now the servant may want to start his own business and imitate the master. But then he's going to leave the protection of the master. So in this way, the living entity, the servant, trying to compete with the master, it's like us trying to compete to attain the position of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The devotee was telling me, just as we were driving today, that her uncle was a doctor. He passed away in this town where we are right now. And he employed a nurse to, just help out, maybe do injections and just do some things as instructed by the doctor. But the doctor didn't know that every week the nurse was stealing penicillin and other antibiotics and going back to the area where she was staying, where there's lots of very poor people, and acting as if she's like a doctor, seeing patients and dispensing this penicillin and charging them and making money. Yeah, so a servant may try to compete with the master, imitate the master and compete, but they'll fail. So actually there's so many trying to compete with Lord Krishna. There's a great struggle. Yeah, great struggle. And there are many competitors out to attain the Lord's position, but it's not possible to become like the Lord. So therefore there's struggle for existence with the material world as different parties try to imitate the Lord. Material bondage is caused by deviation from the service of the Lord and attempts to imitate him. Those are the causes of material bondage. And the Lord is imitated by the Mayavadi philosophers who try to become one with him in an artificial way. And when they think they're liberated, they're actually deluded under the spell of mental concoction. So Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, no one can become one with or equal to God. To imagine this is to continue one's bondage in material existence. Verse 28. Those who are situated in the mode of goodness act piously according to Vedic injunctions. Thus they're elevated to the higher planetary systems where the demigods live. Those who are influenced by the mode of passion engage in various types of productive activities in the planetary systems where human beings live. Similarly, those influenced by the mode of darkness are subjected to various types of misery and live in the animal kingdom. So, okay, let's have a look through the purport here. So there are different goals for different people. There are 3 planetary systems. Some are in goodness, the upper ones, Brahmaloka, Satyaloka, Tapaloka, Janaloka, Mahaloka. Some are in passion, they're the middle ones, in Bhurloka and Bhuvaloka, that's here. And some are in ignorance, they're the lower planetary systems, Atala, Vitala, Sutala, Talatala, Mahatala, Rasatala, Patala, or the animal kingdom. So, the thing is that qualitatively, we are one with the Lord, but because of forgetfulness, we get different bodies in different planets. Now the people are more in passion, so they're working hard in factories. One way or another, generally, they're working hard. Yes, to really get some material benefit. And they forget how distressful it is to live like that. And Bhagavad Gita calls it ugra karma, distressful activities. Those who utilize the energies of the workers, they're the capitalists, and the workers are the laborers. But actually they're all capitalists. But it's just that the workers are in the lower modes, and therefore they're just not so expert. Yes, so the result of it all is distress. But in contrast, those more in goodness, the karmis and jnanis, the karmis try to elevate to the heavenly planets, jnanis try to merge into Brahman. So Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, in this way, all classes of living entities in various species of life are existing within this material world. This explains superior and inferior life forms within the material world. Verse 29. Covered by the mode of ignorance in material nature, the living entity is sometimes a male, sometimes a female, sometimes a eunuch, sometimes a human being, sometimes a demigod, sometimes a bird, an animal, and so on. In this way, he's wandering within the material world. His acceptance of different types of bodies is brought about by his activities under the influence of the modes of nature. All right, so here the point is, well, we are reviewing the nature of the jiva. That's basically the idea. So first thing is, of course, we're part and parcel of the Lord. We're not material, we're forgetful, we are as brilliant as the Lord. We're as brilliant as the Lord, as effulgent, you could say. The Lord is like the sun, the living entities are like the particles of the sunlight. When we're covered by Maya, we lose our shine. But when Maya's gone, we shine again. When we're in Maya, we can't understand our relationship with the Lord, but we must come to Him. Then we'll see ourselves shine. We're covered by Maya because we imitate Him But we cannot really do that. But when we think we can, we become conditioned by Maya. So the engagement in the living entity in Maya is caused by forgetfulness of our relationship with Him, with the Lord. So Prabhupada makes the point, or Prabhupada then goes on, second paragraph, to explain more what happens to the living entity when the living entity falls under the influence of Maya. So Prabhupada in the second paragraph says, living entity becomes exactly like a person haunted by a ghost, speaks all kinds of nonsense. Under the influence of Maya, he becomes a scientist, a philosopher, a politician. Then he has many ideas and plans for humanity, but all the plans are failures because they're all illusory, they're all Maya. So in this way, he forgets his position as the eternal servant of the Lord, becomes a servant of Maya. Either way, he's a servant, but by forgetfulness, he becomes the servant of the wrong, what would you say? The wrong leader. Yes, the wrong one, Maya. So as a servant of Maya, living entity becomes a king, an ordinary person, a Brahmin, a Sudra, sometimes happy, sometimes prosperous, sometimes an insect, sometimes in heaven, sometimes in hell, sometimes a demigod, sometimes a demon, sometimes a servant, sometimes a master, and just wanders all over the universe. But only when he meets the bona fide spiritual master can he understand his position, and then he becomes disgusted with material life. And then he regrets what he's been doing. So this regret is very beneficial. Prabhupada, in a few places, in just the last few chapters, Prabhupada has been emphasizing how regret being regretful is very beneficial, and expressing regret and why did I do that? Yeah, it's very beneficial. It purifies him from material life. So then Krishna grants liberation from Maya. And the Lord explains this in Bhagavad Gita chapter 7, verse 14. Daivihyesha gunamayi mama maya dharachya mama eviye prapadyante mayam etam taranti te. This divine energy of mind, consisting of the three modes of material nature, is difficult to overcome. But those who have surrendered unto me can easily cross beyond it. So there's a third paragraph. We can get out of the clutches of Maya by the grace of Krishna. In fact, that's the only way to get out. Not possible by mental speculation, etc. And when the living entity understands his real position by Krishna's grace, he keeps himself in good Krishna consciousness, then becomes completely free. And of course, when he's strong in Krishna consciousness, Maya cannot touch him. In this way, in the association of devotees, he gets free of the contamination of material existence. And Prabhupada quotes Chaitanya Charitamrita, chapter 22, verse 25. in the Krishna conscious state, the living entity engages in devotional service under the direction of the spiritual master. In this way, he gets out of the clutches of Maya and takes shelter under the lotus feet of Lord Krishna. Right. Very nice. Very wonderful, actually. Okay. So, let's go on now, verses 30 and 31. The living entity is exactly like a dog who, overcome with hunger, goes from door to door for some food. According to his destiny, he sometimes receives punishment and is driven out, and at other times receives a little food to eat. Similarly, the living entity, being influenced by so many desires, wanders in different species of life according to destiny. Sometimes he's high and sometimes he's low. Sometimes he goes to the heavenly planets, sometimes to hell, sometimes to the middle planets, and so on. So, okay, let's have a look at the purport here. So, the idea is living entity as a dog. Living entity's position is likened to a dog. One dog has a rich owner, another is a street dog. And you even find in the Western world, you get all these crazy people. Sometimes people leave lots of money to their dogs in their wills. So therefore this comparison to a dog is good. But if we have to live as a dog, then at least let us live as Krishna's dog, because at least Krishna's dog is happy being looked after by the Lord. So, in the spiritual world, Krishna's dog is always happy eternally. And Bhaktivinoda Thakur sings, Vaishnava Thakur Tomara Kukura Baliya Janaha More. He's saying, I would like to become a Vaishnav's dog, Kukura. Vaishnav Thakur, oh Vaishnav, great Vaishnav, Tomara Kukura, to become your dog. This is what I want. The dog always stays at the master's door. Won't let any unfavorable person come. So similarly, we must engage in the service of the Vaishnav and try to please him in every respect. If you don't please him, you won't make advancement. Even materially, if you don't develop the mode of goodness, you can't go to the heavenly planets. This is described in Bhagavad Gita chapter 14, verse 8, in which Lord Krishna, verse 18, in which Lord Krishna says, those situated in the mode of goodness gradually go upward to the higher planets. Those in the mode of passion live on the earthly planets, and those in the mode of ignorance go down to the hellish worlds. Second paragraph, there are many varieties of life in different planets due to developing the qualities of the modes. Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, if one is in goodness, he's promoted to the higher systems. If in passion, he remains in the middle systems, and if in ignorance, he's pushed down to the lower species of life. Verse 32. Living entities are trying to counteract different miserable conditions pertaining to providence, other living entities, or the body and mind. Still, they must remain conditioned by the laws of nature, despite all attempts to counter these laws. Let's have a look at the purport. Struggle for existence, like dog trying to get someone to give him something, just struggling, and maybe getting hit instead of getting something to eat. So the living entities just wandering around trying to become happy, planning how to counteract the miseries. This is a struggle for existence. But to get out of one misery, we put ourselves in another. But like a poor man, he suffers because he doesn't have money. But if he wants to get money, if he wants to become rich, he has to struggle. So it is not a counteracting measure. It's just a snare of Maya. So if we don't try to counteract the situation we're in, but if we accept it, knowing that it's come from our past activities, then we can engage our energy to develop Krishna consciousness. Prabhupada quotes Bhagavatam 1.5.18. I'll just read the purport, it's very interesting. Persons who are actually intelligent and philosophically inclined should endeavor only for that purposeful end, which is not obtainable even by wandering from the topmost planet Brahmaloka down to the lowest planet Patala. As far as happiness derived from sense enjoyment is concerned, it can be obtained automatically in course of time, just as in course of time we obtain miseries even though we do not desire them. In other words, you don't need to make extraneous efforts to get this and achieve that. It's all going to come in one way or another, whatever you do. So Prabhupada says, as explained, your situation cannot be improved. You can just create another miserable situation. So if we try to improve our Krishna consciousness, the distresses of material life disappear with no extraneous effort. And therefore Lord Krishna promises in Bhagavad Gita chapter 9 verse 31, O son of Kunti, declare it boldly, my devotee never perishes. Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, one who takes to the path of devotional service will never be vanquished, despite all miseries of the body and mind, and despite all misery brought about by other living entities and providence, miseries which are beyond our control. Okay, so on we go to verse 33. A man may carry a burden on his head, and when he feels it to be too heavy, he sometimes gives relief to his head by putting the burden on his shoulder. In this way he tries to relieve himself of the burden. However, whatever process he devises to counteract the burden does nothing more than put the same burden, just move it from one place to another. Yeah, so this is a good description of the futility of transferring the burden around. Yeah, you just transfer it, you don't become free from it. So like this, humanity is creating one trouble to solve another trouble. We have cars to take us quickly, but we need roads. The roads are crowded. Then we get air pollution. Then we get fuel shortage. Then the planet's running out of oil. So to deal with one trouble, we're creating another. So the conclusion is that these processes we manufacture don't really help us. It's basically illusion, just moving the burden around. So the real way to minimize the problems, become free of them, is to surrender to the Lord. Give ourselves to his protection. So Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, the Lord, being all-powerful, can make arrangements to mitigate our painful life in material existence. Verse 34. Narada continued, O you who are free from all sinful activity, no one can counteract the effects of fruitive activity simply by manufacturing a different activity devoid of Krishna consciousness. All such activity is due to our ignorance. When we have a troublesome dream, we cannot relieve it with a troublesome hallucination. One can counteract a dream only by awaking. Similarly, our material existence is due to our ignorance and illusion. Unless we awaken to Krishna consciousness, we can't be relieved of such dreams. So, for the ultimate solution to all problems, we must awaken to Krishna consciousness. So, Prabhupada talks of two kinds of fruitive activities. He talks about moving the burden from the head to the shoulder, but actually keeping the burden in either place is the same. But the transferal from here to here is taking place under the name of counteraction. We're counteracting the problem, we're solving the problem. But we're not. We're just shifting the problem. So this is not the way for becoming happy. This is just for fools and rascals. We have to get out of all of this and go back to Godhead. Then there's real happiness. As the Vedas say, don't remain in the darkness of this material world. Go to the light of the spiritual world. So to counteract one distress, you have to accept another. Both are illusion. There is just no gain. Prabhupada says the conclusion is that one cannot be perpetually happy as long as one exists in this material world. The only remedy is to get out of this material world altogether and return home back to Godhead. 35. Sometimes we suffer because we see a tiger in a dream or a snake in a vision, but actually there's neither a tiger nor a snake. Thus we create some situation in a subtle form and suffer the consequences. These sufferings cannot be mitigated unless we are awakened from our dream. So we're having to deal with so many difficulties. Actually, we're subtle from the gross and material bodies. And we have to learn to tolerate the appearance and disappearance of happiness and distress. Prabhupada quotes Bhagavad Gita chapter 2 verse 14, which emphasizes this, that one has to tolerate these problems without being disturbed. And it's actually material existence which is the cause of all of our sufferings. Once we get out of it, we won't suffer. First, we have to understand we're spiritual. Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, this understanding cannot be fully realized unless one is engaged in Brahman activities, namely devotional service. To get free from the material conditions, one has to take to Krishna consciousness. That is the only remedy. All right, so verses 36 and 37. The real interest of the living entity is to get out of the nescience that causes him to endure repeated birth and death. The only remedy is to surrender unto the Supreme Personality of Godhead through his representative. Unless one renders devotional service unto the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Vasudeva, one cannot possibly become completely detached from this material world, nor can he possibly manifest real knowledge. So, how to become detached from all of this? Must take to Krishna consciousness, do devotional service, fulfill our real self-interest, but people don't know their real self-interest. It is Krishna. So, material existence begins with the bodily concept. It begins with the bodily concept. From that, samsriti, from that comes a series of anathas, unwanted things, desires for sense gratification. Then you get different bodies. First, you've got to control your mind and purify your desires. Otherwise, there's no question of getting free from the material condition. Only by devotional service. So one has to accept the spiritual master and do what the spiritual master says. This is the only way to stop the chain of actions and reactions, cause of birth and death. So we have to take to Bhakti, activities done in service to Lord Krishna, Vasudeva. Must serve him, not the demigods. Have to begin from the neophyte stage and gradually come up. And on every level, the purpose is to satisfy the Supreme Lord. Then you become detached, from your position on the material level. Then you become perfect in knowledge, engage in pure devotional service, realize your eternal nature as the eternal servant of the Lord, and give up all the nonsense services, social service, national service, dog service. And third paragraph, Bhagavatam 127 says, by rendering devotional service unto the personality of Godhead Sri Krishna, one immediately acquires causeless knowledge and detachment from the world. So we have to engage in the service of Lord Vasudeva without material desire, mental speculation, or fruitive activity. So we will carry on tomorrow. Hare Krishna.